Good evening, ladies. Thank you so much for being on time. I really appreciate it. And I'm also noticing that everyone has their full names in the Zoom account. So if you don't have your last name, please add it. But so far, I think pretty much everyone has their full name. So thank you so much for that. So cheers to week 2. We have made it through week 1. Your presentations are on the Google Drive, as was shared in the WhatsApp group. And also you can review your recordings of session 1 and 2 on YouTube as well. And again, you have your third session with Mr. Tross, which promises to be a very, very interesting session. So without further ado, Maki, you have the floor.
Good evening. Sorry, I was just navigating. Good evening to all, and welcome to session 3 of this 4-part series on sustainable agriculture. This evening, we will be talking about pest and disease management. If I could take you back to the first session, we dealt with water resource management. We looked at some very interesting topics under water resource management. We looked at water harvesting, for example, and we realized the importance of water and the importance of conserving water. In the second class, we looked at soil and soil health, and we realized that the soil health is really the farmer's wealth. And so we learned certain techniques to preserve and improve the soil health. And we really did that with the overall subject matter at hand, sustainable agriculture, in mind. Now, soil, water are good ingredients for planting. But while we're planting, we realize that sometimes there are challenges with pest and disease. And therefore, tonight we are going to concentrate our efforts on pest and disease management. We're going to look at the different pests from plants to rodents to animals, and anything that is considered to be a pest in the greater scheme of things. I need to get a full screen, Keithley.
I'm sorry, Maggie?
I need to get a full screen. I'm just seeing, maybe it's on my end.
I think it might be on your end because, ladies, can you tell me I'm resharing again. Can you see it in full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, just give me 1 second.
Okay.
And let me see what's happening here. View options. Okay. I think it was on my end. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're gonna look at the different types of pests. We're gonna look at ways to mitigate against the pest, because at the end of the day, what we want are healthy plants that produces healthy foods for our consumption. So let's talk about the pests first. And I tried to put this in simple terms so that I could understand and you could understand and everybody would be on the same page, because the language could get very technical, but it doesn't make any sense for me to teach something that I don't understand. So I put it in layman terms so that everybody could understand, and I hope you appreciate that. So a pest is anything that causes injury or loss to a plant. Remember, we're talking about plants now. So where it is not said, it is implied that we're talking about plants. So pest as it relates to plants. It can damage plants by making them less productive, affecting the reproduction, affecting where the plant grows, destroying the plant, and so on. Now, we're talking about pest. For a pest to survive, there must be a host. So in this case, we're talking about the plant. The plant that provides pest with the food is the host of the pest. So whether it be a cucumber, whether it be grasses, whether it be a fruit, for example, a watermelon, that is the host for the pest. Okay? Next slide, Caitlin. So there are really 5 major categories that I want to explore tonight in terms of pests. Let's look at insects, for example. What I consider to be insects. The insects have 3 distinct body parts. They would have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So that is in its simplest form in terms of description. That's a pest. Now, we've got another category called nematodes. So these are worm-like structures or creatures, sorry, and they live in the soil or in the root system of the plants. The third one I want to look at is weeds, and we're not talking about cannabis. We're talking about plants growing out of place or in any unwanted areas, or an unwanted plant that is considered to be weeds. And then diseases form part of the categories of pests as well. So in this case, we're talking about abnormal conditions. And remember, we're talking about plants. So abnormal conditions in plants. 5 is the last category I would want to explore. And we're talking rodents and other animals. So animals, pests that eat leaves, stems, fruits, roots, and the actual plant itself. Now, just as an aside, we realize that some of these rodents and animals in today's day comes with 2 feet. And I think we all know what we're talking about here. And they come in male and female. And so we have to protect against those as well. Next slide. So these are some of the most common garden insects. Remember, we spoke about 5 categories. This is the first category we spoke about, which is insects. And I put this slide together, and I'm trusting that most of us are familiar with a few, if not all, of these different insects. There's a lot to go through, but you'd have the slides later on for reference. But some of the ones that we come across on a regular basis, aphids, armyworms, and those of us who grow cabbage, the cabbage worms, see a lot of white flies as well, spider mites, especially in these hot months that we're experiencing. We see a lot of spider mites in the gardens. We see slugs and snails. We see leaf miner and grasshopper and so on. But the ones that I have here aren't the complete picture, but these are the most common ones that I could think of that we come across here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Next slide. So the damage, sometimes this slide reflects some of the damages that we see from the insects. The first one on the top left, we see the drying of the cucumber stem, and this is caused by the cucumber beetle. Sometimes we see some squiggly lines on the tomato leaves and so on, and that is the sign of presence of leaf miner. Spider mites, you would find that the leaves of the plant get really dry and brittle and curl up and really loses all its sap, get really crinkly. Aphids, some small like insects, usually they hide on the bottom side of the leaves. So in your inspection of your garden, you would have to turn the leaves upside down from time to time and just make sure that there's no insects underneath. Normally, what would happen though is that the leaves would start to show some kind of defect, whether it's in the color, whether it's in the texture or shape or something. Once you see that and you don't see anything present on the top of the leaf, you just flip the leaf over. And 9 out of 10 times you would find something under there, especially aphids. Cabbage worm, first sighting of that would be holes in the cabbage leaves and so on. Bacteria blight. Now, this might be new to some of us, but those of us who do a lot of leafy greens such as lettuce, sometimes if we get a bacteria passing through, we find that the bottom leaves start to have spots on them. We're going to talk about the treatment of these a little bit later on. Leaf spots caused by fungus, or for plural is fungi. We have the powdery mildew, and that is also caused by a fungi. And those are a lot of times you see some white spots, especially in cucumber and broadleaf plants. Cucumber usually have them, sometimes okras usually have them as well. Next slide. We talk about insects, but I had to put this one in because not all insects are harmful. We've got some beneficial insects as well. So just bear that in mind. The ladybug, for example, the honeybees help in the pollination, the ladybugs eat a lot of the dangerous insects. Also, some of these beneficial insects improve the soil health, like the earthworms and so on, pollination and destroy pests. So just as a side and something to bear in mind, all of these insects are not harmful. Some are beneficial, and we have to be mindful of that so that when we are trying to eradicate the insects, we don't eradicate the beneficial ones as well. Otherwise, we're doing ourselves more harm than good. So just be mindful of that going forward. Next slide. So we looked at the insects and some of the damages. And so I want to take a minute for us to now examine some of the steps for controlling said insects. And I jot 7 of them down. And we could look at them in this particular order as well. First thing is to identify the insect, because what the treatment that works for example, a white fly may not work for a trip or a mealybug. So we have to be able to identify and monitor the insect population. second thing we need to consider and determine is the potential damage, what we call the economic threshold. Really, what this is, economics, money. So we need to determine whether or not the cost of treating or controlling this insect outweighs the benefit. For example, if the insecticide or the treatment costs you $200, and when you examine the population, you think that, okay, I'm only going to lose 5 pounds of tomatoes. It really doesn't make sense to invest in the insecticide. So that's the economic threshold I'm talking about. But when you're threatened now, and you determine that, hey, the population of the insect definitely need for me to take some action, then you would proceed. Assess the potential environmental issues or the hazards. Decide on an integrated approach to controlling the insect, and we would look at that a little bit later. So once you've decided that, then you would proceed to use the measures that you've decided on, after which you would evaluate the results, of course, to make sure what you did makes sense, and assess the effect on the environment. If it makes sense economically and is damaging the environment, then you have to make a judgment call as well. Okay? Now, the second thing that we spoke about was the nematodes. And nematodes feed on plant root, feed on the cells of the plant root, resulting in wounds. And these wounds allow the entry of fungi and bacteria. And so the nematodes aren't the real problem, is what they do. How else should I put this? The damage to the plant, or the wounds that they make in the plant, allow the fungi and the bacteria to take over the plant. So that is the real crux of the matter. Some of the symptoms you would start to see in the plant is, and the soil, as a matter of fact, is low fertility. The plants would seem as if they are sunburned, so the leaves would start to get dry. In the soil, you would have poor drainage. You start to see the soil getting a little bit waterlogged. Plants would wilt as if they're not getting any water. And the herbicide damage usually presents itself in the leaves being very dry as well. All right? It's almost like you put a harsh chemical without diluting it on the leaves. So it burns, in quotation marks, it burns the actual leaf itself. So that's the kind of effect you get from the nematodes. Now, the next slide, we would look at the first two slides, two pictures on the left are pictures of nematodes. We really don't see them too often until we turn the soil up. All right, so these sometimes present themselves more often than not in the root structures, and the effects are seen on the 4 pictures to the right of the screen. So you would see sometimes with the carrots, you see some bulges, some deformities. In the ginger, you would see some marks in the ginger. A lot of times you would see some holes in the nuts and so on. So these are the effects of nematode damage. Okay? The next slide, please. Let's look at some preventive measures for nematodes. A little bit more tricky than insects, but using disease free planting material. You want to use planting material or plants or cuttings that are free of any kind of nematode presence. You want to select an area where you've examined and you really haven't seen any effects of nematodes in the soil. And you have to use the best cultural practices to ensure good growth. And best cultural practices, we'll get into that a little bit later, but good sanitation really comes to mind. Okay? The third thing on the list, next slide, was the effects of weeds. The effects of the weeds on the plant. And what happens more often than not is when you have weeds growing up in a field, the weeds and the plants compete for light, they compete for water, they compete for nutrients, they compete for space, and sometimes the end result is that you have some slender looking plants because they're trying to go as high as possible to reach the sunlight. The plants would change the color. Sometimes the texture, like I say, the body becomes very slender. And some of the plants might even wither under the competition. And some of these weeds really grow a lot of times faster than the plants that we're looking after. And sometimes we wonder why, but that is just the nature. So some examples of weeds, we have grasses, broadleaves, wild tamarind, cashews, anything that is deemed unwanted in that particular space that we're planting in is considered to be weeds. Next slide. Some of the plant diseases, let's explore that. A lot of times we see the plant itself taking on different color, different shape, and so on. We know something is wrong. So let's explore a plant disease. Anything that prevents the plant from performing to its maximum potential. So whether it be sooty mold, whether it be a fungi, a bacteria, whether it be a wound in the plant, that is preventing the plant from performing to its maximum potential, that is some form of disease. And I try to put it in its simplest terms so that we could all be on the same page and understand. As you would imagine, this definition is broad and includes two things: abiotic and biotic plant diseases. And I'll give a brief definition of both, and I think you'd appreciate what I mean after. Abiotic, it's a non-living agent, and it can't be transferred from one plant to the next. For example, if we're farming and we're not giving the okra tree enough water, we would see the okra tree start to wilt, start to take cover, the okras come in small, and so on. So the plant is not performing as it should, but that wilting cannot be transferred to the plant that is 24 inches away from it, 2 feet away from it, because the plant that is 2 feet away from it is getting its adequate water. So that type of disease or type of damage to the plant cannot be transferred. So that's abiotic. Now, the biotic is caused by living organisms, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and so on. So that can be transferred from one plant to the next. And those are usually transferred sometimes through insects like whiteflies, the powdery mildew, airborne, and so on. So thus the distinction between the abiotic that cannot be transferred is a non-living agent versus the biotic, which is caused by living organisms and can be transferred from one plant to the next. Next slide. Now, this slide is just showing us the difference between biotic and abiotic, like I just described, but brings it out more vividly. So the protist, that's basically organisms, living organisms. We've got animals, fungus, bacteria, those are biotic. Abiotic, non-living things like water, soil, if we got problems in one pot, can't be transferred to the next. The light plant, struggling for light here among a lot of different weeds. The other plant next door is fine because it doesn't have the same conditions surrounding it. So those that slide really brings out the distinction between the biotic and the abiotic. Slide. Let's look at and talk about the favorable conditions for diseases. The environment. If we have a very damp area, we are susceptible to bacteria. Now, droughts, we have certain organisms, certain insects that thrive in droughts, like the spider mite, very high temperatures. They just, white, same thing. Conditions, if we are not adhering to the right irrigation schedule and we're wetting the leaves, especially late at night, we can attract fungi and bacteria. I put this one in the planting time of crop, and you might ask, why? Okay. Sometimes we tend to make mistakes and go out and plant seedlings mid-morning. Sun is already scorching. Very low chance of that seedling surviving. So the planting time is very important. Late in the afternoon, so that the seedling could get the overnight dew, and then wake up with the sun in the morning is much better than the shock that that plant or seedling would endure at 10 o'clock in the morning. Seed selection. Have to make certain that we select disease-free seeds. Never harvest seeds from plants or fruits that have conditions, whether it be say a condition, the fruit was suffering from mildew or spider mite or something like that. Make sure you have good seeds coming from good fruits. A lot of times, if we don't maintain our plants properly, poor lack of plant maintenance could create conditions for diseases as well. Poor sanitation, that's one of the cultural controls. We have to make sure that our sanitation is is of good standard and quality, especially if we're operating in a greenhouse or shade house environment. Whatever we take inside the greenhouse stays there and multiply and affect the plants inside. Sometimes when we neglect plants, we leave them there for disease and so on to take control of. Some of us are guilty of not rotating the crops and leaving the crops there year after year, making it once a disease is there and you attack that particular crop, it would just be waiting for the next crop cycle. And of course, planting in an infected area, that is just an extension of number 8. So we have to be very, very mindful of these favorable conditions for plant diseases, just to enlighten you, okay? In terms of plant diseases, we can break it down into 2 segments, really. 2 types, environmental, caused by plant surroundings that are not conducive for plant growth. And we have some examples here. Might be planting in an area that has some chemical issues, has some pollution issues, weather-related issues, damage to the plant, nutrient deficiencies, over-fertilizing, over-watering, drought conditions, and so on. The other one is parasitic, and this is caused by microorganisms, the fungi and the bacteria and the virus and so on. So just for differentiation, the 2 types, one caused by environmental and one caused by the fungi and bacteria and viruses and so on. Speaking of diseases, the symptoms, it's very important that we understand and know what the symptoms look like. You should always examine your plants and get comfortable with what a healthy plant looks like. I think all of us can do that. When something is wrong with the plant, make sure that you pick it up, talk to your plants. And once you have that conversation, you would say, hey, why are you looking so pale this morning? You would realize that, no, this is not how my plant looked yesterday. It's wilting. What's the reason for that? First thing you got to do is probably check your irrigation. The plant is not getting enough water or any water at all. Then you look at the leaves, the discolored plant leaves. Most plants in the healthy stage of plants are nice, and the leaves are nice and green and nice rich color. Once you start to see some yellowing, start turn brown, even black with sooty mold and stuff, you know that, hey, there's an issue here. If you start to see the leaves curl, you've got issues. You got blossoms that are not staying on the tree, falling off, not developing properly. We've got issues. Spots on the leaves, the rotting of fruits. For example, tomato plant might look nice and healthy and so on, but to the bottom, the tip of the tomato, not where the stem is, the bottom of the tomato, you might see a black spot under it. And that is a sign of the plant not getting enough nutrients, mainly calcium, and it presents itself that way because it's not getting enough water. There's not enough water there to carry the nutrients up to the plant and into the fruit. So there might be enough for the plant itself, but for the plant to feed the fruit, feed the tomato properly, then we got a problem. So everything looks good, even the tomato looks good. But then to the bottom of the tomato itself is a black spot. And we call that bottom end rot, just for you to understand what it's called. But it's usually lack of calcium, which in turn is lack of water. So there's not enough solution to take the nutrients up into the plant and onto the fruit itself. We would start to see decrease in the yield. For example, that tomato plant is accustomed to give you a pound of tomato per week. Next week, or this week, you only find that you're getting one small tomato, and then you say, hey, something is wrong. So these are signs or symptoms of diseases. Eventually, if you don't pay close attention, you've got a dead plant on your hand. And that is not what you want at all, at all, at all. When you lose one plant, as they say in life, one body is too much. One plant is too much as well. Because we're in this business to make it viable and to make some money, right? So you save all your plants and everybody's happy. Now, let's look at some of the methods for controlling the diseases. We've looked at the causes and so on. So now let's look at the methods. First thing we want to have is ideal growing conditions. Cultural practices must be there, clean environment, proper sanitation. We have to become familiar with the pathogens and the causing agents of fungi and bacteria. Remember we spoke about the dampness and so on? Sometimes the heat is there and the high temperatures, we really can't do a whole lot about it, but where we can try to mitigate, as in using some shade houses and some greenhouses. But that we will get into in more depth in the next session. Increasing the resistance of the plant. They're coming out now with heat-resistant varieties. The Taiwanese and the Israelis are doing a very, very good job of breeding these new types of seeds. And some are already available to us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. The Taiwanese under the brand No New Seeds, and the Israeli, I think they've got a tomato seed called the Heat Master, but I really can't remember the umbrella under which they're marketing their seeds. Yeah, but the No New Seeds, I think they're distributed in the Caribbean by Caribbean Chemicals. They're out of Taiwan, and they're very good in terms of our climate here. So those are something that we can look forward to. Okay. The same slide, just before we move on, we were talking about the greenhouse, and that's a foot bath, sanitizing your feet before you get into the shade house and the greenhouse and stuff, and that would help to keep the pathogens at bay as well. Okay, we can move on now. So we're looking at the effects of some of these diseases. You see the holes in the leaf on the top left, and that's caused by the green clover worm. The armyworm does something very similar as well, especially on broader leaves like pumpkins, squash, and so on. Sometimes you may leave your field on a Friday and go back on a Monday morning and you wonder what happened. But the armyworm passed through, and like an army, they just destroy everything. So it's important that we keep a good eye on our crops and see exactly what's going on almost on a daily basis. Now, aphids, the second on the top, that is what the aphids look like. The powdery mildew, see that's an okra leaf, and so it's white powdery spots on it, and in no time, that okra tree is history, really. Spider mites, bottom left, you would see some white spots start developing on the stems and the leaves of the plant. and just know what it looks like and what it is, so that when we come to talk about treatment, we will know exactly what we need to use. Wilting, this could be from lack of water or nematodes destroying the root system such that the plant cannot uptake the nutrients. Rot in the celery plant, that looks almost like a bacteria. So we just have to look at the plants and realize, hey, this is not normal. You really don't have to remember what everything is. But once you know that it's abnormal, then everybody has cell phones now that takes really, really good pictures. Take a picture and send it off to agriculture, send it off to me, send it off to somebody who can help you. And one of the things that I encourage from day one, and I'll put it back on the table now, is for you to get active in the Helen's Daughters group, the Women Academy group, so that you could share your stories. Because a lot of times what happened is that somebody would have seen or would have had a similar issue before and can shed some light or point you in the right direction as to how to deal with your situation. Next slide. So the rodents and other animals is another area that I want to touch on. And this is very, very critical, because here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we have very high population of monkeys in St. Kitts and Nevis. Donkeys, very prevalent in Nevis. And so we need to deal with these animals so that we can protect our farms. How we do that? The first order of business is to make sure that the property, your farm, is fenced properly. Now, to pull a fence is one thing, but that is not enough to keep out the monkeys. You may keep out the donkeys and the sheep and the goat and so on, and even the cattle. But we have to install some electrical solar panel fencing in order to mitigate against the monkeys. We'll see how we do that in the slide coming up. But setting traps, there are some sticky traps that we can set in the field and in the protected structures. The blue traps usually attract what we call trips, and the yellow traps attracts like aphids, spider mites, and so on. Now, and in my experience, I would tell you, in my experience, I've got it here, the animal noise repeller. These things look like they work wonders in North America. But in the Caribbean, where we have all of these different noises and stuff, the monkeys and the animals here really are not afraid of these noise repellers. They might work for a week or two, but after that, I'm sorry to say, but my experience is that they really don't do an effective job. So if you could use other mitigating methods, please do. But I guess they're there, so if you want to try them for ourselves, we sure can, but I really haven't had a lot of luck with them. So let's move on. We spoke about the ruminants, but I think we are all too familiar with the picture at hand here. The monkeys that we have here in St. Kitts and Nevis is really reaping havoc. I know that they had some rangers out there from time to time trying to take out a few of them, but we just can't sit back. We have to look at mitigating ways to keep them at bay, to protect our investment, our farms, our livelihoods, and so on. Wild donkeys, the fencing for the most part is taking care of those. But and the sheep and the goat and so on, cows, pigs. Pigs is a real problem in some parts of St. Kitts. Not too much farmers in Nevis, from my knowledge, complain about pigs, but there are few. Most of the pigs in Nevis is under control. Well, the birds could be a problem. Some of the mitigating measures, sometimes we put some blue plastic bags in the garden. From time to time, the birds, when they flap in the wind, the birds would take off and so on. It doesn't seem like they like the color blue either. So, hence for the color blue. But whatever it is that is necessary, we need to um, to put in play to keep some of these rodents and small ruminants at bay. We've been having some problems on both islands with perennial larceny, and that is very unfortunate. I've known, I mean, I myself have been um, on the receiving end. I have had to put some measures in place, costly, surveillance and all of that kind of thing. And it really is a shame, to put it mildly. It's a real shame. You get up early in the morning, you set your farm up, you ply your trade, and somebody is just there waiting for your hand banana. I mean, yes, you could deal with the monkey, but when is your neighbor and people who are talking to you every day and waiting until you leave your farm to go and visit? It's a real shame, as far as I'm concerned. Next slide. So this slide here is really to drive home the point for the monkeys. This is a electric solar panel. You've got your normal conventional fence to the bottom, and then you could either run it to the side or both to the side and on top. With this one, you would have to keep the fence line clear and keep monitoring your fence line on a regular basis, because these monkeys are very smart and they try all the tricks in the books to get over into your property, to get the banana, to get the avocado, to get the mango. And so you have to try to stay one step ahead of them. Now, I could tell you that my property where I live is almost have coconut trees going around, well, 3/4 way around the perimeter. And one day I stayed upstairs and couldn't figure out how the monkey's getting over. But one of the branches from a coconut tree was swaying in the wind. And the big jack monkey just waited and waited until the wind blew in his favor and blew the coconut branch low enough for him to just leap up and get on. And once he got on, he stayed in the middle of it so that his weight pushed it down for the smaller ones them to come up. And they almost used it like a ladder. I saw that firsthand and I just couldn't believe my eyes. I've heard all different kind of stories, but when you see it for yourself, you say, listen, these guys are smart and we have to stay one step ahead of them. I mean, this is real life situation now. Next slide. So we've looked at insects, we've looked at nematodes, we've looked at all of the different aspects, the weeds and so on. Now, in terms of treatment, we need, in my mind, what we call an integrated pest management or IPM approach to controlling pests and diseases. So let's talk a little bit about integrated pest management. It's an ecosystem-based strategy that focuses on long-term prevention of pests and their damage through a combination of techniques such as biological control, habitat manipulation, modification of cultural practices, and use of resistant varieties. All of these we spoke about earlier. We're just trying to package it now and put it together. It is an approach to control the pest in an integrated way. Under these methods, pesticides are only used according to standard established guidelines, and treatment is done with a goal of removing only the target organisms. It's important to note here that if we're talking about infestation by a bacteria, we cannot apply a fungicide and expect to get good results, because that fungicide would have no effect on the bacteria, because the dominant agent in the fungicide has no bearing on the bacteria at all. So it's important to know what we have and know what we need to deal with the problem at hand. It is a method which is used to solve pest problems without or at very low risk to people and to our surroundings. Let's continue. The integrated pest management is an eco-friendly method of pest control, so it must be friendly to the environment. Furthermore, integrated pest management can also be considered as a pest control program that combines several methods of prevention from the pest and protection of the plants. So we want to get rid of the pest, but we still want to preserve the plant and the environment. Integrated pest management incorporates several biological, ecological, cultural, physical, and chemical strategies for controlling the pest problems. Integrated pest management, or IPM, programs use information on the life cycles of pests and their interaction with the environment. So once we know the life cycles and the different pests that we're dealing with, then we could use the information to manage the pest damage. Let's continue. These are some of the steps that I would suggest in the implementation of the integrated pest management strategy. Setting action triggers. What we're saying is that you have to set points at which the situation and the environment both dictate immediate pest control activities. So if we're saying that, okay, we're going to put some traps, or we're going to put some indicators in the field, and if we catch, say, 50 white flies per, say, 10 square meters, then we know that that is the trigger point at which we need to do something. If we only catch, say, 10 white flies, then there's no need for action to be taken in terms of getting the sprayer out or anything like that. We now would have to start to monitor. Hence we go to number 2, to monitor to see when the triggers are met or we reach a trigger point. So we have to monitor and identify the pest. It is about keeping an eye on the different types of pests to identify the harmful ones as well as the harmless ones. When we're treating the pest, we have to be mindful that, remember earlier on I said there's also some beneficial insects such as the ladybug. We don't want to have our integrated pest management interfering or taking out the beneficial insects as well. So we have to weigh and see how best to deal with something like that. Number 3, preventing. To control pests really thoroughly, proper prevention methods needs to be implemented. And once your prevention or your preventative maintenance is not doing the job, then you have to resort to number 4, which is controlling. So when the preventative methods don't work, the way to get rid of the pest is to implement proper pest control techniques. But these are only implemented after evaluating their efficacy. So you have to try to understand how effective, for example, say you're going to spray your field, how effective the chemicals will be in destroying that particular insect and what damage it would cause to the environment. Stay. Now we look at some of the advantages to the integrated pest management. It will really lower the cost of intervention because we know that we have put all the measures in place. We've got the proper sanitation. We're identifying the different pests and so on. We're not using harsh chemicals at random to damage the environment. And we're minimizing the residues of hazardous pesticides. We're trying to run away from hazardous pesticides anyway. And so the ones that even our agriculture department in St. Kitts and Nevis are using are considered very mild. I, for example, I'm a big fan of the neem oil. And once we take a break and come back, I'll show you the neem oil substance that we use. It's basically covers 3 things: insecticide, pesticide, and miticide. So it covers a broad range. We got to start to use part of the integrated pest management, seeds that are resistant to certain viruses. And once you're getting seeds from a trusted seed provider, usually the package on the seeds would tell you what the seed is resistant against. Useful and best intervention for the general population. So basically, we're trying to use as much user-friendly chemicals, if there's such a thing, as possible. Now, in anything you have its disadvantages, and I was really hunting to find the disadvantage of the integrated pest management system. More involvement in technicalities and of the methods. Time and energy, it's kind of really consuming if you're not up with it, a lot of research and so on. And there's really nothing that I know of in St. Kitts and Nevis readily available as a guideline for integrated pest management systems in terms of agriculture. I haven't seen anything, haven't heard anything, been asking for them to put one together, even try to volunteer my time to get the process started, but we haven't gotten there yet. So that to me is a disadvantage, that we don't have anything that we could pattern off or use as a guideline. So the challenges, I just alluded to that. It was ahead of myself. Inadequate research. I guess it's costly, so lack of finances, lack of supportive government departments and the policies. Not too many people around here seem to be knowledgeable and have the expertise. And even throwing it out there, got some pushback from, well, I would say more seasoned farmers. These are the things that they're accustomed to do, and it's been working for them, and they're not willing to change. So not quite sure how much we can do there, but education really is one of the challenges as well. We need to educate our farmers. Let's look at the next slide. Pest control techniques. We alluded earlier to these. Cultural control, physical control, biological control, and chemical control. I want to spend the next few minutes to just explain what each one is. I think I've alluded to cultural a few times. So yeah, let's get into it. Next slide. Cultural. We could look at this, took some time and broke this down into two different cultural control methods. Primary, use pest-free plants, use resistant varieties, destroy your garbage, practice proper sanitation, and have a good maintenance on-farm program. Secondary, things that we really don't pay attention to, but does the job too. Mowing of the lawn. When you mow your lawn, you cut down the grasses. When you weed whack, you get rid of the weeds and so on. Irrigation. Best time to irrigate, early morning, late in the afternoon, and send the water directly to the roots of the plant and not the leaves. Wet leaves, especially overnight, can cause attract pathogens, cause fungi and algae, and some bacteria as well. Fertilizing, we need to use appropriate fertilizer and not over-fertilize. Pruning is something that I don't think that we do enough of. I think we like to see big trees, but big trees does not always give us the most benefit. For example, we've got some very tall mango trees and tall breadfruit trees. We can't reach the mangoes to the top. By the time the mango drop, it's no good. Same thing with the breadfruit. I've seen in South Florida, a lot of avocado trees, a lot of mango trees, and I'm yet to see any over 12 or 15 feet. They prune these mango trees and such that the fruit are low hanging. And because of the pruning, the trees tend to bear much bigger fruit. So the yield, you might not get the same number in terms of count, but if you're gonna wait and talk about the poundage, guaranteed, you would get more pound per tree than without pruning. So pruning does have a big advantage. The plant get more air, more sunlight penetrates, you get bigger fruits, you're able to reach the fruits, and so the fruit doesn't get damaged and so on. So these are cultural practices. Now let's look at the other one, I think, next slide. biological control. This method uses living organisms to control pests. Now, we've got some very interesting pictures. So the frog eating an insect. I know a lot of ladies might be squinting at this point because I'm yet to meet one who is not afraid of frogs. So, but the frog really does its job. We tend to kill them when we see them because they just don't look too sexy. But in the farm environment, they really control unwanted insects and so on. The next one over is very interesting because this is a plant that really eats insect. And what happens is that the insect goes in to the plant leaf. It triggers some sensors and the plant just closes up. And in no time, start to secrete some enzymes that would break down the insect, and the plant then is able to turn that insect into nitrogen. And so there's a whole science behind that, but that's for another forum. The ladybugs control a range of insects. So yes, when I was youthful, I used to pride myself in catching as much ladybug from my father's garden than anything else. But now I know that the ladybugs are beneficial insects and we really need to keep more of them around and encourage their habitat. Next slide. Physical control. Now, the physical control of these pests is really labor intensive. People who are into organic farming and so on, this is one of the techniques that they use a lot. But this is using tools or equipment for control. And sometimes in a small garden, you could go around and pick off the worms off the cabbage. But if you have a few thousand heads of cabbage, then it becomes a real challenge. And so, yes, organic has its place, and I'm one for pushing organic farming, but it has its limitations as well. Mulching, covering the ground with a layer of plastic, sawdust, or other materials can prevent weed growth. So mulching is another physical weed control method. We mentioned before the mowing of the grass, you cut off the weeds. Search and destroy, searching for worms. Sanitation, again, very, very important. Too many farms do not adhere to proper sanitation guidelines. I think the COVID-19 would have taught us all valuable lessons. It really doesn't cost us too much to wash our hands and wipe our feet and wash the tools that we use as well, whether they be knives, scissors, cutters, whatever it is. A little soap and water goes a long way. So sanitation, we have to pay special attention to sanitation, especially in a closed environment like shade house, greenhouse. Next slide. One of the other controls that we mentioned before, which we want to spend a minute on, is the chemical control. Now, this is use of pesticides, which is a chemical to control pests. Chemicals are often mixed with surfactant, which is a material which helps to disperse, spread, wet, or emulsify the pesticide formulation. So that is something that is already mixed with the active ingredient in the pesticides. And it should be used as a last resort and with the lowest impact on natural enemies, the environment, and ourselves. While we're here on chemical control, I went searching and found this picture to the right. And I said, I have to put this in because far too often I'm driving around and I'm seeing people spraying outdoors with little or no protective equipment or clothing. That's a no-no, people. No. We really don't know, and I really don't want to find out what these chemicals would do to the human respiratory system. So this picture on the right tells a story. See how this guy is cloaked up? He's covered all over. You see nothing at all that is exposed. All right, better to be safe than sorry. We don't want to find out that 15 years down the road, the Nemo, like they say, that is natural, had some kind of ingredient in it that causes cancer or causes a skin problem or causes sterility or whatever. So yes, let's make it a priority when we're using chemicals, if you have to put on the proper protective gears, clothing, and equipment. You would hear them in some quarters referred to as the PPE, personal protective equipment. It refers to your clothing, your gloves, your respirator, your hats, whatever it is. You need to put them on, and when you finish, you need to wash them thoroughly so that the next time you go to use them, they're clean and ready to go. Next slide. Just wanted to spend an extra half a minute and tell you that there are about 5 types of main types of chemicals that we use on the farm. Insecticide. So if you don't remember what chemical you need, when you go to marketing, agriculture division, you say, listen, I've got insects. I want something for insects. Later on, we will have to be more specific because one size doesn't fit all when it comes to insect. What would work for whiteflies will not work for thrips and so on. And so if you're not sure what it is, you know it's an insect, but you're not sure what it is, please take a few pictures, walk with them, and let the people at marketing who's selling the pesticide help you identify what you have and what you need. Nematodes, there's only one thing that I know is that the nematicide. Herbicide, that's for weed control, but you really need to know there's a few different ones out there, whether you want something for grass, whether you want something for broadleaf, for long-term effect, or what it is you need. Fungicide, as the name suggests, controls fungi. Germicide for bacteria. And so this was just to give you an idea that there's not, you just can't pick up, for example, I'm drawing a blank, but Phyton 27, which is a fungicide, and go spray it for bacteria, is not going to work. So we need to know what we have and exactly what we need to deal with it. Next slide. For the home gardeners, we got some homemade remedies, and some people use a combination of some of these things, but just want to highlight them. Garlic, neem extract. The neem extract is very, very good. I've used it myself. And I've even soaked the seeds and the leaves in a 50-gallon drum of water for a couple of weeks and go back and use it with great effect. Now, just aside, I don't know if it's the oil from the seeds, the combination of the oil and the extract from the leaves, or just the sheer stench of it, because it really doesn't smell good. But it really works in terms of keeping insects at bay. Now, a little bit of dishwashing liquid or some oil, what that does is put a little coating on the leaves and really make it difficult for the insects to penetrate. The marigold plant, some people swear by that. The Venus flytrap, very interesting plant. That's the one I was alluding to earlier. Traps the insects and make light work of them and turn it into food, nitrogen, and so on. Red hot pepper, baking soda, wood ash, cinnamon powder. I really had to put the vinegar and specify the mother brand of vinegar. That's the organic one, because I have had great success using it. There was a time, I think maybe about 2 years ago, I had a problem with my lettuce, black spots on the lettuce, left, right, and center, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me what was happening. Research after research, long night after long night, and I came across one post that says it was a bacteria, and the best course of action was the vinegar. And I'm saying vinegar, started to doubt it, but I said, listen, I've tried everything else. And I'm talking 6,000 plus lettuce. I have no choice but to try the vinegar. And in a matter of a week or days, I started to see a great turnaround. And if you go to my farm right now, you would find a large bottle of mother's vinegar somewhere, because I was never going to be out of it again. Such good luck I had with it. Next slide. I can't finish my presentation without stressing, I know I mentioned it, without stressing the safety guidelines to follow when using pesticide. That guy again on the right, very important. It's important that we also use appropriate and approved pesticides. Read all the instructions before we use them. Use this pesticide with the lowest toxicity, this word always stay at my tongue. Toxicity. Use proper equipment and protective clothing. Again, the PPE, personal protective equipment. PPE, personal. So your protective gear, respirator, coverall, gloves should not be worn by anybody else. Those are yours. Those are your personal ones. Put your name on them. Adhere to the mixing ratios. Now, some of us are very, very guilty. We hear the manufacturer say, listen, 1 teaspoon to 5 gallons of water. And we say, well, listen, I think I've got a big infestation. So if 1 teaspoon is going to work, 2 teaspoons is going to work twice as good. It doesn't work like that. Once the manufacturer gives you the ratio, you adhere to that, because that is what is most effective. Anything over that, you're wasting your chemicals, and we know how expensive they are. Anything below that, you're not getting the same efficacy. So please adhere to the mixing ratios. Avoid damaging the bottles. If you get any spills, clean it up as a matter of urgency, and wash and wash and wash and clean up after. Store these pesticides, chemicals, whatever you want to term them to be, in a very safe place, away from children and your pets. You don't want to come back and see your dog stretch out there. You don't want to come back and see a cat stretch out there. And you don't want to come back and God forbid that your child is not breathing properly. So store these in a very safe place. Now, just as important, when you're finished with the bottles, never wash them out to reuse them. Please don't take those chances. Discard of them properly according to the manufacturer's recommendation. Dispose of the bottles. If they're expired, don't use them. You're exposing your plants, yourself, everybody around you, the environment. No, it's a no-no. Get rid of them. Next slide. Techniques for storing. Pesticides should be stored close to cleanup supplies, such that if you have any kind of spills, you could clean up as quickly as possible and return things to normalcy. Pesticides should be kept in the original container. I've seen just like how some farmers take chances and put gas in Clorox bottle and water bottle and all kind of foolishness. These are not good practices. I repeat, these are not good practices. Refrain from doing them. Never store pesticides near water supply, food, medicine, or anything like that. Do not use and store flammable materials with pesticides. That's a no-no. Ensure to check pesticide containers for leak, damage on a regular basis. Dispose of unwanted and outdated materials. I think I touched on that before. Please, I'm not saying it because I have a mouth. I'm saying it because I really want you to do it. I don't need to hear of any accidents or anybody get poisoned or anything like that. We're dealing with chemicals. We're not chemists. We're agriculturists. Let's listen to the manufacturer's recommendation and we're all safe. Next slide. And so we've looked at what I would consider most of the do's and the don'ts about pests and diseases, how to identify the pests and diseases, how to run a successful farm, really. And so I hope you could appreciate how it's all coming together. The soil health, the water, taking care of the plants, and so on. Now, I'm open for full discussion. I know we should have lots of questions. I tried to put this presentation as simple as I can for all of us to understand and to trigger your appetite for asking some questions. So, Caitlin, I'll turn this segment over to you for moderation. And I was hoping to take a little break, but I think I'm so heated now that I want to go through unless we think we could take 2 minutes and come back.
All right. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We can maybe take a 2-minute break. Is that okay, ladies? And then we'll go straight into Q&A.
All right, so we return at
7:30.
5.
7:35, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
A long 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
For those on the call now, before Maki returns, feel free to grab some water or take a bathroom break. For those who don't need to, feel free, if you're more comfortable with putting your questions in the chat, you can do so. And those who prefer to raise their hands and ask their questions out loud, you can also start using the raised hand function on the bottom as well. So the quicker you do it, I think the faster we can go through the Q&A without waiting. So return shortly in about 4 minutes. Thanks, ladies.
I'm good to go when you're ready, Caitlin.
Sure. Ladies, okay, we have 1 more minute. I'll give you 1 more minute to get settled, drink your water, relax. Maki, we have quite a number of questions in the chat.
I
So,
expect that.
so I'll start with the chat. Then I'm just sliding to make sure I don't miss out on anyone. All righty. So, okay. We will start with Miss Abigail Christopher. When it comes to getting rid of weeds, what is the best practice? Mowing the weeds or pulling them up by the roots? The first week we talked about leaving the soil untouched. So pulling up the weeds might not be the best based on that fact. Please advise.
Okay, good question. The thing is, if the plants themselves are well rooted, then pulling up the weeds is okay. Because the roots of the actual plant that you need would help keep the soil together. Now, if they're seedlings, then it's a little bit more tricky because the root structure is not wide enough to hold all that soil together. So it's a judgment call some of the time.
Perfect. Thanks, Maki. Next question from Miss Amanda Delaney. If the pesticide is bad for mankind, it is also bad for our, oh, okay, sorry, this wasn't a question. This was some good advice, actually. Miss, oh, there's so many. Okay, here's one. What amount of the apple cider vinegar would you mix?
I would normally mix about 2 tablespoons to the gallon. That works for me. As a matter of fact, that is a recommendation that I found on the internet from a farmer out of Texas, I think. And that was about 2 years ago. But anytime I had to use it since that, I used 2 tablespoons to the gallon of water. And that really does wonders.
Okay, great. I might add the apple cider vinegar is also quite good for us as human beings, especially if you have like dietary issues or like it's great for breaking down foods and so forth.
Yeah, for
and
sure. But then I was really skeptical, but had nothing to lose. And I just said, listen, I've tried everything else. It's going on a month and I'm not getting any relief. Might as well. I tried it, and like I say, if you go on the farm right now, you can't take 2 steps without finding it. It's there, ever present. It's that
Yeah.
good.
It is fantastic, and you're quite right about the Bragg's type of apple cider vinegar, the organic one, because the mother on the bottom. I think, like someone was saying, it's just if it's good for plants, it's probably good for us. And I
Exactly.
take a shot of it every day, and it's really, really good.
I prefer whiskey.
Well, that too. Well, I think we answered your question, Ms. Tucker. Did you use white vinegar or apple cider? So it would be apple cider.
Yeah.
So from Miss Williams, what would be your recommendation? Should we put preemptive measures in place if you suspect an attack from pests because of your experiences in plants, monitor, and then if necessary, do the intervention?
Okay. Let me put it this way. What I normally do is, say once every 2 weeks, we spray with, let me show you. Everybody could see this? It's a triple action neem oil. And what it is, it's an extract from the neem plant, but it's a broad spectrum chemical. It's a fungicide, insecticide, and a miticide. So we use it as a preventative measure in the greenhouse environment, and it has worked well for us. I mean, I can't say that once we use it, nothing happens, but it minimizes the chances of any breakout or anything like that in the greenhouse environment. Every now and again, we might still see, especially in the house where we have cucumbers, because of the nature of it, there's always a damp area here and a damp area there. We see some fungus presenting itself. But once we use the neem oil, say once every 2 weeks, just as a preventative measure, we keep most things at bay. So I believe in the preventative action, but usually it's like that more so in a closed environment than outdoors. Outdoors, I think, we monitor more outdoor and before we really take action because the fields are much bigger.
Okay. Well, I think you covered this, but do you use the vinegar full strength or diluted?
Diluted. Like I said, 2 tablespoons to the gallon.
Are crushed eggshells mixed with soil beneficial to plants? If so, what plants is it best used for?
Well, eggshells are rich in calcium, but the thing is, eggshell does add calcium to the soil, but because the eggshell is not readily broken down or rotted, it is a very, very slow process. So a lot of people would use eggshell for plants that are showing sign of calcium deficiencies. Remember, I gave the example like the tomato plant with the bottom end rot. That's a sign of lack of calcium. But be mindful that the plant needs proper irrigation for it to be able to take up the nutrients, including calcium. But here again, Keaton, is that calcium is not a macronutrient. So plants use calcium in much smaller amounts. The macronutrients we're looking at are NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium, and potassium. So calcium, boron, iron, those are micronutrients. So, plants really don't need those in any large amounts. But yes, if eggshells, they're rich in calcium, sure, you could grind them up and throw them to your plants. But remember, in order for the plants to use the calcium, you must have proper irrigation such that it can uptake the calcium and other nutrients.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you use any dish liquid or does it have to be the Dawn brand?
The Dawn brand has good viscosity. So anything that has good viscosity, I'm really not an advocate for Dawn or any one of them, but anything that has good viscosity is okay to use. Some of them are not as rich, and therefore I wouldn't recommend them. But the Dawn is good. There's another one that I've used before. The brand is not coming.
I think Dawn did a good marketing job as well. Okay. What causes okra leaves to become spotty and yellow?
All right. Spotty, usually a sign of bacteria. Depends on the dark spots are usually a sign of bacteria. You would find that more on leafy greens, lettuce. I've seen them on pak choy as well. But leafy greens, the black spot usually is bacteria. White spots are usually fungi. And fungi and viruses. Yellowing, usually that's a deficiency of nutrients, not really, or sometimes an attack from, say, nematodes, because the plant is now not getting, the root system is compromised, so the plant can't pull the nutrients up. So then the leaves are not getting the food that they require. They're not photosynthesizing as much, and so they start to discolor and turn yellow and so on.
Okay. I may just also want to mention, I'm going to look it up, but actually on our side, there's a particular app that we use that you can actually download on your iPhone or Android. I think it's Spot My Plant or one of those apps, but essentially you take a picture of maybe a dying plant or exactly what you mentioned, whether it's spotty and yellow, and it can basically tell you sometimes what is what's the cause. So whether
Yeah,
it's nematodes and so forth. And I think the app also like tells you the names, the scientific names of different plants and whatever. I'll try to get the app name and put it in the chat.
normally, the Google, the picture in Google normally does something similar to that too, in terms of the name of the plant, but I never tried it for the actual disease. So that's good to know.
Yeah, that's a great point. The reverse Google image search as well is good, and it's
Yeah.
okay. All right. To apply the vinegar, do you just spray it on the plants?
Yeah. You just mix it, dilute it, 2 tablespoons to the gallon, and then you put it in your sprayer and away you go. Mhm.
One side of my garden, when I plant sweet peppers, the trees turn yellow and the peppers fall off. Can you please tell me what causes this?
Sounds like there's a problem in the root system. Maybe it sounds like, have you tried anything else? Because it sounds like you've got something in the soil, sorry, in the soil that's affecting the root. Maybe some kind of nematodes or something that's affecting the root. So it'd be interesting to try something else and see how does the root structure look? What does the root structure look like once you pull up that pepper plant?
Okay.
Are we having bulging on the root system or deformities? Look at the root system and see exactly what's happening.
Okay, perfect. Um, when talking about the timing of planting, when is the best time to plant broccoli and cauliflower?
Okay. Here's what I would tell you. The timing I was referring to is the time of day, really. You don't want to plant them when the sun is already up in the morning, especially we're going through some serious a period of high temperatures. In the afternoon, I would say after 3 o'clock, and before 7 o'clock in the morning, or as early in the morning as possible. Because how my dad used to put it is that you want the plant to wake up with the sun and get used to the sun. It's just like you going out in the garden. Many of us try to get out there before the sun comes up so that we could climatize, so to speak, our bodies with the sun. We don't get the shock of going straight out in the sun. Same thing with the plants and the seedlings. Now, you want to plant them late in the afternoon or very early in the morning. In terms of what time, the other time to plant, leafy greens, I plant whenever I get a chance, every day if I could. For example, lettuce, we do a lot of lettuce. So we plant lettuce twice a week, Mondays and Fridays. So whether the moon is on target, whether it's new moon, half quarter, last quarter, full moon, it really doesn't matter to me. I'm planting. So with leafy greens, I really don't wait on the moon or the sign. I just plant, and I've had good success doing it. So I don't know about anybody else's experiences, but leafy greens I plant. And if it means planting every day, I have no problems with that at all.
Okay. Moving right along. When a pumpkin vine begins to show white mold/mildew spots, can the soil be reused once the diseased plant is uprooted?
Yeah, that is more sign of a fungus. What you would want to do is uproot the plant and burn the plant because the fungus is usually airborne. So it would move from one plant to the next. But the fungus really is not a soil-borne disease, so it doesn't stay in the soil. So once you get rid of that and all of the trash and so on, dispose of that, clean up. Doesn't hurt to, once you plant, then you spray some fungicide to make sure that there's nothing lingering. But fungus, once you get rid of the plants, you shouldn't have any issues in planting soon after.
Okay. Is companion planting helpful in pest and disease management?
I would say, yeah. Because in terms of companion planting, really depends on what you're planting. But some plants are repellents and known repellents. We talk about rosemary, we talk about neem, and there are a few others. So yes, that is something that some people really recommend. So I definitely would say, yeah.
No, I agree. I think the marigold, as you mentioned earlier,
Marigold as well, yeah. Mhm.
and also herb plants can be really effective, like mint, rosemary, as
Mhm.
um
Even chives,
yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So sometimes what happens is that the strong sense of the rosemary plant really deter insects. So I've seen with some people plant some rosemary plants in strategic places around the farm. Some neem as well, because the natural neem plant in itself is a repellent. But those neem plants, you have to be very careful because they take up a lot of real estate once you don't prune them and keep them in check. They act as good buffer too, huh? Good wind buffer. Yeah, but a lot of times we don't have the luxury of having a lot of space, so we have to use different methods.
Exactly. And going to neem now. I see you have the neem oil fertilizer. I saw my mom boil the neem and spray her plants with that. Will it be as effective?
I'm not quite sure it will be as effective because this one is the oil extract, but and then you have the ratios on this. But before I started using this, I could tell you that I've used the neem oil, well, the neem water. Let me put it this way: I've soaked the seeds and the bush in a 50-gallon drum and let it sit there for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then use it after that, and some peppers that was affected by different worms, and it really worked wonders. Um, I had to ask myself whether it was the stench that was coming from it or the actual oil and the nutrients from the oil and the leaves. But whatever it was, it worked wonders. And I've used that thing for a couple of years well before I found the triple action neem oil. But the only problem I have with it is the smell. Once you could get past that, you're good to go. Very effective.
Alrighty.
So
Moving
where the
on.
raise hands tonight?
We have one, so we have I think two other questions, then I'll go to the raised hand. Um Dealing with the weeds is one thing, but how do you deal with the grass? Burning is expedient, but not good for soil health.
That's true. Where you can, and this is what we do at A1 Farms. We like for season pepper. We plant season pepper outdoors, and we space them at least 24 inches apart. And so once they reach a certain height, what we do, we go through with the weed whacker and we weed whack through them. The guys are really adept with doing this weed whacking between the various plants and so on. So that really works for us, but it takes some skill, really takes some skill. And so we're able to keep the grasses down by weed whacking. And after a while, what happens is that because we plant like three in a hole, it gets bunchy enough so that it stifles most of the grasses coming up after a while. So if someone can handle the weed whacking, that is strongly recommended. But you have to plant them properly. You can't plant them too tight in terms of spacing, at least 24 inches apart.
And just in terms of like dealing with grass and so forth, sometimes the grass can be a good friend with our plots, our land space in rows. Or what we've done is when we cut the grass, we essentially use that huge bulk of grass for compost.
You can use
So
it as mulching as well.
exactly.
Yeah.
While it may be may take more effort, but you may get more out of it in the long.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so we will actually go to Josette, whose hand is up, and then we'll go back to the chat. Go ahead, Josette.
My question is, you must use chemical on the farm because looking at this slide, I see the farmer, he well geared up with all his suit. What damages do after he sprayed that fluid and we human intake it?
All right, very good question. We have to appreciate if we're doing a small scale farming, we really don't need to use any chemicals, any pesticides, anything like that, because in terms of labor, we can handle that. But when it comes to commercial farming and people doing acres and acres, it's really impossible to do most of that farming without the use of chemicals. Now, yes, we're talking chemicals, but chemicals you use as a last resort, really, when nothing else is working for you. And the chemicals, thank God, that we get from the agriculture department here in St. Kitts and Nevis is really mild chemicals. The ones that we get from TDC are the stronger chemicals. And I'm really happy to see that the government has banned stuff like gramazone, which is a really dangerous chemical. But you have organic chemicals like I just showed you here, the neem oil. This is very, very good. So yes, Josette, I hear you. Good question. But when you're dealing with large farms and so on, there must be you must weigh your balances and decide when and how and what type of chemicals you're going to use. But chemicals should always be last resort.
Alrighty, thank you. And like you said, rightly said, Maki, it really is focused on obviously commercial farming. There's a million different types of farming methods. There's people like, for example, there's one woman here who has hundreds of acres, and she practices regenerative agriculture. But again, that requires a lot of time, a lot of capital that you're able to play around with. And well, obviously a lot of land. So obviously if it's something where business and commerce is your main objective, then sometimes you just have to find a way. But the good thing is that you don't have to completely, be totally dependent on chemicals. There are many, many, many ways to continue to try to reduce our chemical use.
What we try to do, Keaton, is encourage farmers to be responsible. And if you have to use chemicals that would have the least effect on the environment and on the beneficial insects and plants and the soil and all of that. And I think the agriculture department, the ministry in St. Kitts and Nevis is taking some proactive measures because there's gramazone that is banned. There's 3 or 4 that I know that they've banned because those are dangerous chemicals. I can't remember off the top what the names are of the others, but and the chemicals that they themselves sell are really on the lower end of dangerous chemicals. So those are pluses, and we just have to keep encouraging the farmers to be responsible in the chemical use and adhere to proper sanitation and cultural practices on their farms. Because some people may not use chemicals, but you go on the farms and the way they conduct themselves on the farm and run the farm, you would never eat anything from them. So you have to look at it and weigh your pros and the cons and so on.
Definitely. Agreed. Okay, so considering the time, we will take the 3 questions in the chat, 3, I believe, and then we will go to Josette once again. Okay, is there an above the soil indication if your root crops such as ginger or carrots, etc., are being attacked? If not, how can you tell if they need treating or not?
Well, root crops, you have to look at the leaves. The leaves are the first sign that something is going awry underneath in terms of disease. Now, for example, if you have attacked by rats or rodents and they're eating, say, your potato, the vine still looks good because the vines they're still getting the nutrients that they need. Now, if the potato is attacked by a weevil, then in 90% of the times, the root structure still looks good. Now, if it's attacked by, say, nematodes, then you would start to see the vine and the leaves starting to show yellow and so on. So it's not in all cases that the leaves reflect that there's a problem, because the root of certain plants is not the right word, not the right terminology, but it's like the fruit. So the potato is like the fruit of the vine. So the plant still survives because there are several other roots that are pulling the nutrients to feed the vine. And sometimes the vine that runs along throw roots out as well. So it's very difficult in terms of the potato. But a lot of times, once the ginger itself is being affected, you could see that the body of the plant start to turn color as if to say the plant has reached maturity, when it's not. So these are some of the subtle differences that we have to look at.
Okay. Next question, and then we'll go to Josette. Well, it's a statement, but I agree. I think our reason for the rise in our cancer cases may be due to what our food has been fed with, definitely.
Yeah, that's a concern.
Another question, when a small citrus plant shows yellowed leaves to the bottom near the soil surface with small white insects underneath the leaves, is it best to just pluck the yellowed leaves off?
Yeah, take them off, and you would need to find out exactly what is affecting it though. Because sometimes it affects the actual body of the citrus plant. I've seen, and I really don't have a proper handle on it. I've seen a lot of citrus plants in St. Kitts and Nevis almost go extinct, like the tangerine. Shaddock is gone. I don't know if there was something in the air for years that we really didn't pay attention to. And a lot of the ones that are left now, the body of the plant itself got a lot of white spots on it. I really don't know the answer for it, but it's something that I've brought to the agriculture department's attention, and they keep promising to look into it. I've been doing some research myself, but I really don't have a handle on it to date. But it's something that we have to watch, because I've got a couple of sour orange trees. They're prolific in the bearing, but something just doesn't look right about the stems themselves. Even sometimes the leaves are looking good, but the stems got these white spots on them.
Thank you. And Josette, you can go ahead. Then we will take, after Josette goes, we will take 1, 2, 3, the last 3 questions. Go ahead, Josette.
What type of water do you use to water your farm? Is it pipe water, or you use pump water, rainwater?
All right. The rainwater is ideal, and that's the first preference. The rainwater. We do a lot.
Sorry, Maki, you said you accidentally. I was trying to meet someone else. Hi, Maki, you're muted. Sorry, I muted you accidentally. I was trying to mute someone else.
Okay. All right. So let me take it from the top then. I was saying rainwater is the ideal water to use. However, in my case, we use a lot of water on the farm. And so sometimes we have to resort to the government water, which is full of chlorine and so on. So we don't get the same effect as if we use the rainwater. So whenever possible, we cover this. Harvesting of the water and storing of the water is very important. Now we store about 4,000 gallons of water, and that's not even enough to run the farm for a week. So, it really depends on the scale at which you're farming. You try and harvest as much rainwater as possible, because let's look at our own environment. Once the rain falls, everything flourishes. So that in itself gives you an indication that the rainwater is superior to the well water or to any other water that you get from the water department.
Thank you. And next in line, there are some plants that from time to time have some raised bumps on the leaves that kind of look like tumors. Are you familiar with it? And if you are, is it harmful in any way?
Well, I'm really not sure of what we're speaking with the raised bumps on the leaves, but any kind of defect on the leaves is to me is cause for concern. If you could, please take some pictures and send them to me so I could have a closer look at them. But it's a sign of a problem, because the leaves in their normal state should be blemishless and in most cases nice and green. Some plants have more of a dark green than others, but any kind of deformity, whether it's curling, bumps on the leaves, or yellowing of the leaves, is suggesting that there's an issue. So if you could, and Keithan, remember to get that app. I think we all can use it. But in the meantime, take us as many pictures and from different angles as possible and send it to me so I could have a closer look, and then if needs be, get some of my colleagues involved and see if we could get some answers.
Agreed. We can also help. We can forward out those pictures to our agriculture officer, who's usually on a weekly basis diagnosing plants and so forth. So feel free to use the WhatsApp chat to your advantage. Okay, so we will go to seems like the last, well, one comment. I just wanted to probably mention that many chemicals tell you on the bottle the safe time when to spray, like 3 weeks before harvest, or biological chemicals can spray 5 days before harvest.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's something that I really overlooked. All of the chemicals would definitely have pre-harvest times, meaning they would tell you once you spray how many days you have to give as a window before you harvest, and the frequency of applying the chemical. Some would tell you maybe every 5 to 7 days, and some would tell you, okay, only 3 applications for a particular crop. And so after that, that's it. So remember in the presentation, I stressed that you should read all the instructions before attempting to use any of these chemicals, whether it be a herbicide, an insecticide, nematicide, whatever it is. Make sure you read all the instructions and adhere to the mixing ratios and all of that. Outside of that, you're doing yourself and maybe the environment injustice.
Definitely. And just to add, ladies, as women, these chemicals also have an adverse effect on maternal health and reproductive health as well. So you definitely want to be careful with the mixing, with the application, and so forth, as Maki mentioned. Final question for the evening. Is there a farmer's almanac that we use in St. Kitts?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure who in St. Kitts sells it, but I think Law's Bookstore, I've got it there years ago. In Nevis, Evelyn Drugstore used to sell it. But there's something online as well. And the agriculture department normally would post on a monthly basis the good times to plant and good times to harvest. So these are some of the things and places that you could tap into. The times to plant, Keithlin, I think once I get that, I could post it in the chat so that people could have access to it, because it normally comes to my email. There's a Caribbean farmers chat that I'm a part of, and that's a good resource as well. So some of those information I'll just pass on. But the advent of the internet, most of those books, Farmer's Almanac, are not as readily available as years ago, when most farmers, that was the primary source of guidance, right? Kitten, just before we wrap up, you know, I've done 3 classes, and I must say thanks to all the ladies. I mean, I've been stopped in the street, I've been WhatsApp, I've been called, and they're really enjoying the sessions, and makes me well, give me the energy to move forward. And I really look forward to these sessions. Thanks, ladies.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. And thanks, Maki. We enjoy having you leading these sessions. So, and it's great. We also see some of the comments on social media as well. So thanks, ladies, for the energy.
Yeah,
Just
good energy.
yes, just a few housekeeping notes before we leave. Ladies, as you know, the second week is wrapping up. September is going to be a busy month for you because we're going to start our first set of practicals in September. So fairly soon you will be getting emails from us and polls deciding on the days of your first farm visit, which would most likely be at A1 Farms. As soon as we get our St. Kitts and Nevis coordinator on board, Mrs. Latoya Duncan, she will be able to coordinate with you, and you'll get a chance not only to have the farm visit, but to actually get to know each other in person. So that should be fun. And also I noticed regarding the almanac, some person said that Miss Descent sells them. Judith's sisters also sells them as well.
Okay. Yeah,
right.
they when they had the shoe store where Buddy's restaurant was at, they used to be one of they were one of the premier places in Nevis to get it. But I know, yeah, since then I think Evelyn's drugstore. So Sharon is her name. I was talking all that to remember her name. Sharon is her name. Sharon Dayson.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. At least we have the spots. Well,
Yeah.
thank you once again, Maki, and thank you so much, ladies. It was such an amazing session. Love the energy.
Hi,
Hello.
sorry. She still sells them, Mackie. I buy mine every year from her. She sells them
Oh,
in
okay.
the bus stop in the Nevis, the Newcastle bus stop. So she
That's
sells
what,
them there. About
in the
$17. I normally
in the
buy
lit-
them every year. Pardon?
in the little square.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
But I
that's
can
what
get
you have in the back.
yes, yes. But you can get to Judith and then she can meet you in the square. I think it's about $17. I normally buy them and gift them to farmers, so that's where you can get them from.
Thanks for that, Tracy.
No problem. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah. Good night.
Thanks a lot, Tracy. Perfect. Well, ladies, it was another amazing session. Maki, thank you once again, and wishing everyone a very pleasant night, and we will see you on Thursday. Just a heads up, Maki's presentation is already on the Google Drive, and I will try my best to get the video of tonight's recording uploaded on YouTube and send you the link in the chat. Take care, everyone. Have a
Just a
wonderful.
reminder, Thursday is climate change and protected structures. I think that one would be up the alley for those who were asking about hydroponics and protected farming. And so that should be very interesting as well. See you then. Thanks, Caitlin.
Yeah, should be interesting. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Take care.